This weekend, we have the third Sunday in the Easter season, and these Easter gospel narratives are so rich and tender in their tone. And here in Cycle A of the lectionary three-year cycle, we have on Easter 3 this really literary almost story of Jesus' appearance on the way to Emmaus. And it's an interesting story. Oftentimes, these stories have been told in the past of the resurrected Christ appearing to the apostles as sort of him proving that the resurrection happened, as if Jesus has to prove to us anything. And really, I think that's one way certainly to see these stories, but there's always a much deeper level that you can view these stories. And this story about the two apostles on their way to Emmaus, being joined by Jesus who they do not recognize, talking with him on the way, and then recognizing him in the breaking of bread. It's so much more about our discernment. It's a parable almost of the way we can see Christ in our lives. And it's interesting that as Christ was teaching them in the didactic motion of the journey, their eyes were still closed. But in the act of hospitality, when they share a meal together, when he breaks the bread, suddenly they recognize him. And we see that in Jesus' teachings before the resurrection over and over again. His idea that inasmuch as you have done this to the least of these, you have done it to me. Over and over again, Jesus talks about being a good host, having hospitality, caring for people. And of course, that's how the two disciples recognize Jesus, is in that act of hospitality and that intimate act of sharing a meal. And then for us in our tradition, of course, we think of that primarily in terms of the great Eucharistic hospitality that we have every Sunday and how we can come together and feel and know the presence of Christ as we unite our hearts together with those in the congregation and indeed with those all through the Christian church in every age. So the music and the prayers and the readings will all focus on that immanence and that presence of Christ that we can experience. One of the most beautiful expressions of that is in a communion hymn that we have that we will sing at communion. Hymn 305, Come risen Lord, and deign to be our guest. Nay, let us be thy guests, the feast is thine, turning the tables on really who is the one as the host. And there's a lot of imagery from that Emmaus account in the poem of the hymn. And the tune that we will be singing is a tune by Leo Sowerby, an American 20th century composer who was primarily based in Chicago, but at this time he was also spending a lot of time at Washington National Cathedral. And this tune, interestingly enough, was composed to be part of the service when they dedicated the Gloria in Excelsis Tower of the National Cathedral. And it's a melodic masterpiece. It's so sumptuous and yet easy to sing. The choir will also be singing some really beautiful music, both at the offertory with this setting of Edmund Spenser poetry, Most Glorious Lord of Life, and an English translation of O Sacrum Convivium, O Sacred Feast, by the Canadian composer Healy Willan. But then we hope that you will also join us back in the afternoon for Evensong, when we will continue thinking about the Emmaus story and the presence of Christ with us. The choir has some beautiful music planned, a really excellent setting of Psalm 108 that we will chant as part of the Psalter. And then the anthem will be Harold Friedel's beloved anthem, Draw Us in the Spirit's Tether, that talks very much about experiencing Christ as we gather together in worship. So I hope that you will join us here at St. John's Cathedral for a day full of the presence of Christ, worshiping with us at 8 o'clock in the church, at 10:30 in the church, and then coming back for Evensong at 4:45.